Get her off this plane right now. The words cracked through the first-class cabin so sharply that every conversation stopped at once. Heads turned. Phones lowered. Even the flight attendants froze for a heartbeat before all eyes settled on the woman standing calmly beside seat 2A. Naomi Brooks didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply held her boarding pass in one hand and a slim black carry-on in the other, while two airport security officers stepped into the aisle as though they had already decided the ending of a story they had never bothered to read. Outside the window, the late afternoon sun reflected off the polished wing of the aircraft parked at Gate B12 at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Boarding had nearly finished. Families were buckling children into seats. Business travelers answered final emails. A young couple whispered excitedly about their vacation. Then everything changed because one woman in a charcoal hoodie, faded blue jeans, and white sneakers didn't look like someone's idea of a first-class passenger. "Ma'am, your ticket has been flagged," one security officer said, keeping his tone measured but firm. "Please step into the aisle." Naomi looked at him with steady eyes. "My boarding pass scanned without a problem," she replied. "I was already welcomed aboard." Before the officer could answer, a senior flight attendant folded her arms and sighed loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "People try this every week," she muttered. "They hope nobody notices until the doors close." A man across the aisle wearing an expensive navy suit smirked without looking away from his tablet. "Just delay the flight another 20 minutes, he said sarcastically. "That's exactly what we all needed." Soft laughter rippled through a few nearby rows. Naomi remained perfectly still. Her breathing never changed. She had seen that look before. Not once. Not twice. More times than she cared to remember. It was the look that judged a person before hearing a single word. The look that measured worth by clothing instead of character. She slowly handed her boarding pass toward the nearest officer again. "Please scan it one more time," she said. "You'll find my seat assignment hasn't changed." The flight attendant didn't even glance at the barcode. "We've already seen enough," she answered. "This cabin is for confirmed first-class passengers." The sentence lingered in the air longer than it should have. A woman sitting near the window frowned. Another passenger quietly exchanged uncertain glances with his wife. Something about the scene felt wrong. Naomi wasn't shouting. She wasn't refusing instructions. She wasn't causing a disturbance. She was simply standing there while assumptions grew louder around her. Several rows back, a young trainee flight attendant named Emily Carter stared at the boarding tablet in her hands. She blinked once, then twice. The name on the screen looked familiar. Very familiar. Before she could speak, the gate agent appeared at the aircraft door with hurried steps and whispered something to the lead attendant. Whatever was said made the woman's expression harden even more. She pointed directly toward Naomi. "Escort her off the aircraft," she said. "We'll sort it out at the gate." The cabin fell into complete silence as every passenger waited to see what the woman in the hoodie would do next, unaware that the airline was only minutes away from making the most expensive mistake in its entire history. Naomi Brooks slowly placed her carry-on beside her feet before looking from one security officer to the other with the same quiet composure that had unsettled boardrooms for more than 2 decades. There was no panic in her face and no resentment in her voice. Instead, there was a calm certainty that seemed completely out of place in a cabin where nearly everyone expected embarrassment, apology, or resistance. She simply nodded once. "If you believe I should leave," she said evenly, "I will cooperate." The lead flight attendant appeared almost disappointed by the absence of conflict. She had prepared herself for an argument, perhaps even raised voices that would justify what was happening in front of nearly 40 first-class passengers. Instead, Naomi picked up her bag without complaint and stepped into the aisle. Every eye followed her. Some watched with curiosity. Others, with silent judgment. A few looked away, uncomfortable with how quickly assumptions had replaced facts. Emily Carter remained frozen near the forward galley, her boarding tablet still open in trembling hands. She quietly scrolled through the passenger manifest one more time. The green confirmation icon was still there beside seat 2 Alpha. The reservation had never disappeared. The ticket had never been invalid. She looked toward the lead attendant, opened her mouth to speak, then stopped herself as another crew member shook his head almost imperceptibly. The unspoken message was clear. Do not interfere. Naomi walked toward the aircraft door with measured steps, that never hurried and never hesitated. The polished cabin reflected soft afternoon light across the ceiling, while conversations slowly returned in uncertain whispers. A businessman leaned toward the passenger beside him. "She probably booked the wrong flight," he murmured. Across the aisle, an older woman quietly replied, "That is not what this looks like." Near the bulkhead, a teenage girl lowered the novel she had been reading and watched Naomi disappear toward the open aircraft door. Something about the woman's dignity lingered in the cabin long after she passed. Outside on the jet bridge, the air felt cooler and strangely quieter. The sounds of baggage carts echoed below, while boarding announcements drifted faintly through the terminal. One security officer slowed his pace. "Ma'am, we are simply following instructions," he said. Naomi looked at him with a gentle expression. "I know," she answered. "That does not always make the instructions correct." The officer looked away without responding. Those few words settled heavily between them. Naomi had experienced moments like this before. At 24, she had walked into a luxury hotel after closing the largest commercial real estate transaction of her young career, only to be mistaken for housekeeping because she carried her own garment bag instead of designer luggage. At 29, she had been asked 3 separate times whether she truly belonged inside an executive investors conference despite wearing the same credential as everyone else. Each experience had taught her the same lesson. Bias rarely announced itself loudly at first. It often arrived disguised as procedure, concern, or policy. She refused to let bitterness define her. Instead, she built companies where respect became the standard instead of the exception. As the group reached the gate area, several waiting passengers quietly looked up from their phones. The lead attendant spoke confidently with the gate supervisor before pointing toward Naomi again. Emily finally stepped off the aircraft and hurried just close enough to hear the conversation. Her eyes dropped once more to the electronic manifest in her hands, and this time she knew remaining silent would make her part of the mistake that was unfolding before everyone watching. Emily Carter tightened her grip around the boarding tablet until her knuckles turned pale. The electronic manifest still displayed exactly what she had seen inside the aircraft only moments earlier. Seat 2 Alpha. Confirmed. Paid in full. No alerts. No restrictions. No security flags. She looked from the screen to Naomi Brooks, then back again as if hoping the information would somehow change. It did not. The gate supervisor folded his arms and glanced impatiently toward the jet bridge. "What is the delay?" he asked. The lead flight attendant answered before anyone else could speak. "The passenger could not be verified in first class, so we had her escorted off before departure." Emily blinked in disbelief. "Her reservation is verified," she said quietly. The supervisor barely looked at her. "Are you certain?" Emily lifted the tablet higher. "Yes, sir. I checked it twice." The lead attendant exhaled sharply. "You are still in training, Emily. You probably opened the wrong passenger file." Emily lowered her eyes for only a second before checking the screen again. The information remained exactly the same. Naomi stood several feet away, calm as ever, her carry-on resting neatly beside her shoes. She neither interrupted nor defended herself. She simply watched as people debated her identity without asking a single question about who she actually was. Around the gate area, more travelers had begun noticing the unusual scene. Several passengers who had already boarded stepped into the open aircraft doorway, curious why departure had stopped. Others inside the terminal slowed their pace, sensing that something significant was unfolding. A middle-aged woman carrying a rolling suitcase quietly asked another traveler, "What happened?" A man shrugged. "They say she was in the wrong seat." The woman frowned. "She does not look confused." Nearby, a white businessman who had been sitting in first class walked into the gate area with an amused smile. "I told you she probably wandered into the premium cabin," he remarked loudly enough for several people to hear. "You cannot expect every ticket to be real these days." A few uncomfortable chuckles followed, but most people remained silent. Naomi turned toward him without anger. "My boarding pass has never changed," she said. "Only the assumptions around it have." The businessman looked away without answering. Her words seemed to settle over the gate like heavy rain clouds before a storm. Emily stepped closer to the supervisor once again. "Sir, I really think we should scan her pass another time before making any final decision." The lead attendant immediately shook her head. "We are beyond that. Boarding is complete. We cannot delay an entire flight because someone insists they belong where they clearly do not. Naomi's expression remained unchanged, but her eyes reflected something deeper than disappointment. They reflected recognition. She had watched situations like this unfold throughout her career. Facts slowly disappeared while confidence filled the empty space they left behind. The louder the assumptions became, the less anyone seemed interested in verifying the truth. One of the security officers quietly cleared his throat. There would be no harm in another scan, he suggested. The lead attendant answered with unmistakable certainty. We are following established procedure. Naomi offered a faint smile that carried no satisfaction and no resentment. Sometimes, she said softly, people confuse procedure with certainty. Those standing nearby fell silent once again. Even the officer who had escorted her off the aircraft found himself wondering whether the woman everyone doubted had actually been the only person who had remained completely certain from the very beginning. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond the terminal windows, the aircraft still waited at the gate, its engines silent, completely unaware that every passing minute was bringing the airline closer to a decision that would echo far beyond a delayed departure. Emily Carter took one careful step forward before anyone else could end the conversation. Her heartbeat was loud enough that she could almost hear it over the boarding announcements echoing through the terminal. She looked directly at the gate supervisor instead of the lead flight attendant. Sir, I need to say something. The supervisor turned toward her with visible impatience. Make it quick. Emily lifted the boarding tablet where everyone could see it. I personally watched this boarding pass scan successfully at the aircraft door. The system accepted it immediately. C2 Alpha was assigned to Ms. Naomi Brooks before boarding began, and it is still assigned to her now. The words hung in the air with surprising weight. Several nearby passengers exchanged glances. One elderly gentleman removed his reading glasses and leaned forward to hear more clearly. A young mother quietly lowered her phone after pretending not to watch the confrontation. The businessman who had mocked Naomi only moments earlier folded his arms and looked away, suddenly less eager to offer another opinion. The lead flight attendant gave a dismissive smile. Emily, you are new. The system is not always perfect. Emily shook her head gently. The reservation is not the only thing I checked. I confirmed the passenger identification during boarding. Everything matched. The supervisor frowned and extended his hand. Emily immediately passed him the tablet. His eyes scanned the information line by line. Confirmation code. Payment completed. Frequent traveler status. First class assignment. Every field appeared exactly as Emily had described. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed his face, but before he could respond, the lead flight attendant spoke again. There must have been an update after boarding. We cannot second-guess every decision once security becomes involved. Naomi listened without interrupting. Her calm presence seemed almost impossible to understand. Most people would have defended themselves long before now. Most people would have demanded apologies or raised their voices. She did neither. Instead, she quietly observed every choice being made around her, almost as though she were allowing everyone to reveal who they truly were. Emily turned toward Naomi with genuine concern. Ma'am, I am sorry this is happening. Naomi offered a small, gracious smile. Thank you for choosing honesty. Those 5 words landed more heavily than anyone expected. They were not dramatic. They were not emotional. They were simply sincere. Nearby passengers seemed to relax slightly, as if someone had finally acknowledged what many of them had already begun to suspect. A woman standing near the boarding lane spoke softly to her husband. She has been respectful this entire time. He nodded slowly. That is exactly why this feels wrong. Even one of the security officers shifted uncomfortably. He replayed every instruction he had followed over the last several minutes, and realized none of them had originated from anything Naomi had actually done. They had all come from assumptions repeated often enough to sound like facts. The supervisor finally lowered the tablet. His expression had changed, but hesitation still held him in place. He glanced toward the lead flight attendant, then toward the aircraft waiting silently outside the terminal windows. The schedule, the crew, the passengers, the growing audience at the gate. Every factor seemed to pull him in a different direction. Naomi quietly reached into the pocket of her hoodie and removed her phone. She looked at the screen for only a moment before locking it again without placing a call. She was in no hurry. Experience had taught her that truth rarely needed to chase anyone. It only needed enough time to arrive. Around the gate area, the silence became heavier with every passing second, while somewhere far beyond the terminal glass, decisions made inside a single boarding lane were already beginning to cast shadows much larger than anyone there could possibly imagine. The supervisor looked down at the tablet one final time before handing it back to Emily Carter without another word. The evidence had not changed. The reservation was still valid. The boarding pass had still scanned correctly. Yet no one stepped forward to correct what had already happened. Around the gate, uncertainty slowly transformed into uneasy silence. Travelers who had been impatient only minutes earlier were no longer checking their watches. Instead, they were watching Naomi Brooks. She stood with effortless composure beside her carry-on, never demanding attention, never asking for sympathy. Her quiet confidence seemed to challenge every assumption that had been made about her since she first stepped onto the aircraft. One of the security officers shifted his weight and spoke carefully. "Ma'am, I hope you understand we were responding to the information we received." Naomi nodded respectfully. "I do understand." She paused just long enough for everyone nearby to listen. "What concerns me is how easily information becomes certainty when nobody stops to verify it." No one answered. Even the businessman who had laughed earlier found himself staring at the polished floor instead of meeting her eyes. The lead flight attendant crossed her arms once again, determined not to surrender the authority she believed she still possessed. "Regardless of what the tablet says, we cannot simply put someone back on the aircraft after security has removed them." Emily looked toward her in disbelief. Even if the removal should never have happened, the question lingered unanswered. Naomi quietly looked through the large terminal windows toward the aircraft resting motionless at the gate. The sight carried her somewhere else entirely. More than 20 years earlier, she had been 23 years old, wearing a modest business suit she had saved months to afford. She had boarded a regional flight after winning her first major commercial development contract. A fellow passenger questioned whether she belonged in the premium cabin. The crew had politely asked her to wait while they verified her ticket again, even though no one else had been delayed. She remembered standing alone near the boarding door while people walked past without seeing the embarrassment behind her smile. That afternoon she promised herself something she never forgot. If success ever found her, she would build organizations where respect was never reserved for appearances, titles, or expensive clothing. She returned to the present with the same calm expression she had carried all afternoon. Time had changed her circumstances, but moments like this still carried familiar echoes. The difference was that she no longer measured herself by the opinions of strangers. She measured herself by the standards she refused to abandon. Emily stepped closer. "I know this cannot erase what happened," she said quietly, "but I wanted someone to tell the truth." Naomi smiled warmly. Truth usually begins with one person willing to say it out loud. Those nearby heard every word. A middle-aged couple exchanged thoughtful glances. Another passenger quietly whispered, "She has shown more grace than anyone else here." The supervisor inhaled deeply, clearly realizing the situation had slipped beyond ordinary boarding procedures. Every passing minute made the unanswered questions heavier. Naomi reached into her pocket once more and unlocked her phone. This time she scrolled through a single contact before pressing the call button. When the line connected, her voice remained calm and measured. "Good afternoon, Rachel. It is time. Please activate Protocol Atlas." There was no urgency in her tone, no anger, and no trace of revenge. Only quiet certainty. After a brief pause, the voice on the other end answered without hesitation. "Understood, Ms. Brooks. I will notify the executive team immediately." Naomi ended the call, slipped the phone back into her pocket, and looked once more toward the aircraft waiting beyond the glass. Around her, no one understood what those few words had just set into motion, but within boardrooms hundreds of miles away, phones were already beginning to ring. Naomi Brooks slipped her phone back into the pocket of her hoodie as though she had just completed the most ordinary call of the day. There was no dramatic expression on her face and no satisfaction in her eyes. Around her, the terminal continued moving at its usual rhythm. Families searched for departure gates. Flight announcements echoed overhead. Coffee cups clinked against small cafe tables. Yet inside offices far beyond Gate B12, The quiet sentence she had spoken moments earlier had already begun setting an entirely different world into motion. Rachel Simmons, Naomi's executive assistant, ended the call and immediately opened a secured conference line. Within seconds, the chief legal officer, the chief financial officer, the head of corporate investments, and two senior members of Brooks Capital Holdings joined the meeting. Rachel spoke with calm precision. Protocol Atlas has been activated by Ms. Brooks. Effective immediately, suspend all pending authorization related to the Horizon Airline strategic financing package. Freeze document execution. Notify every participating institution that executive review has begun. No one questioned the instruction. No one asked why. They simply answered, confirmed. Back at the airport, the gate supervisor finally cleared his throat. Ma'am, perhaps we should move this discussion into a private office. Naomi shook her head politely. There is nothing private about what happened. It took place in front of your passengers. The truth belongs in the same place. Emily lowered her eyes for a moment, quietly absorbing every word. The lead flight attendant still refused to acknowledge what had unfolded. This has gone on long enough, she insisted. The aircraft cannot remain at the gate forever. Before anyone could respond, the supervisor's company phone vibrated in his hand. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and declined the call. Almost instantly, it rang again. Then a third time. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. Excuse me, he murmured before stepping a few feet away. Naomi watched without speaking. She already knew the sequence. Protocol Atlas had never been created for revenge. It existed for accountability. Every executive involved understood that if she activated it personally, something serious had occurred. Nearby, passengers continued whispering among themselves. The elderly gentleman who had listened quietly since the beginning turned toward the businessman who had mocked Naomi earlier. You judged her before you knew anything about her, he said calmly. The businessman looked uncomfortable. I only assumed. The older man gently interrupted him. That is exactly how these moments begin. The words settled heavily between them. Emily stood beside Naomi again. May I ask you something? Naomi smiled. Of course. Emily hesitated before speaking. You have stayed remarkably calm through all of this. How? Naomi looked toward the aircraft resting beyond the terminal glass. Because anger would only confirm the story some people already decided to believe. Patience allows the truth to arrive first. Emily slowly nodded, realizing she was witnessing something much larger than a delayed flight. Across the gate area, the supervisor ended his phone call with noticeably tense shoulders. Before he could return, another call arrived, this one from a regional operations director. He answered immediately. His posture became noticeably straighter as he listened without saying a word. When the conversation ended, he looked toward Naomi with an expression that had completely replaced confidence with uncertainty. The lead flight attendant noticed the change. What is happening? She asked quietly. The supervisor did not answer right away. He simply stared at Naomi Brooks, as though trying to remember where he had seen her name before. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, boardroom calendars were being cleared, financial projections were disappearing from presentation screens, and a $4 billion funding agreement that executives had spent nearly 18 months negotiating had just been placed on immediate executive hold, all because one woman standing quietly beside Gate B12 had finally decided the time for observation had come to an end. The gate supervisor slowly lowered his phone, but before he could speak it vibrated again. This time he answered immediately. His voice, once confident, became noticeably restrained. Yes, sir, she is still here. A long silence followed. Every person standing nearby watched his expression change with each passing second. I understand, he finally replied before ending the call without another word. The lead flight attendant stepped closer. What did operations say? He hesitated. They asked for her full name. The attendant shrugged dismissively. Then give it to them. The supervisor looked toward Naomi Brooks. May I confirm your identification one more time? Naomi reached into the pocket of her hoodie and calmly handed him her driver's license. He accepted it with careful hands, studying it much longer than necessary. Then he typed her name into his company tablet. The screen refreshed. His eyes widened almost immediately. He blinked once, then searched again, believing he had entered the wrong information. The same executive profile appeared a second time. Before he could finish reading, his phone rang yet again. He answered without taking his eyes off the screen. Yes, sir. I have confirmed her identity. His face slowly lost all color. Understood. He lowered the phone and stood perfectly still. Emily Carter noticed the change first. Sir, she asked quietly. He looked toward Naomi with unmistakable disbelief. Ms. Brooks, he said carefully, are you the chief executive officer of Brooks Capital Holdings? Naomi nodded once. Yes. The surrounding conversation stopped instantly. Even passengers several yards away fell silent after hearing the name spoken aloud. The businessman who had mocked her earlier stared in complete disbelief. Emily covered her mouth with one hand, suddenly remembering a financial magazine she had read only weeks before. The photograph had been different. Naomi had worn a tailored business suit instead of a hoodie and sneakers, but the calm eyes were unmistakable. The lead flight attendant frowned. Brooks Capital, she repeated. The investment firm? Naomi answered with the same steady voice she had maintained since boarding began. The same firm that has spent the last 18 months negotiating a $4 billion financing package for Horizon Airlines. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. The supervisor slowly lowered the tablet. That cannot be. Naomi gently finished the sentence for him. Because I do not look like the person you expected. The words settled over the terminal like complete silence after a powerful storm. She continued without raising her voice. You did not remove me because of anything I did. My boarding pass was valid. My identification matched. My reservation was confirmed. You removed the person you imagined instead of the passenger standing in front of you. The elderly gentleman quietly nodded. Emily looked down, holding back tears of frustration, not because Naomi had revealed her title, but because she had already known the truth before any title became necessary. Naomi folded her hands calmly in front of her. You question my place on this aircraft without questioning your own assumptions. That is the real problem. At that exact moment, the supervisor's phone rang once more. He answered immediately. His shoulders became rigid as he listened. Yes, Mr. Chairman, she is standing right here. A brief pause followed before he slowly extended the phone toward Naomi with both hands. The chairman of Horizon Airlines would like to speak with you personally. Naomi accepted the phone with quiet grace. Good afternoon, she said. Yes, I believe we finally have everyone's attention. Naomi Brooks held the phone to her ear while the terminal around her remained unusually quiet. The chairman's voice carried a mixture of urgency and disbelief. Ms. Brooks, I have just been informed about what happened at Gate B12. On behalf of Horizon Airlines, I sincerely apologize. Naomi listened without interrupting. Her expression never changed. An apology matters, she replied calmly. But accountability matters more. Across the gate area, the lead flight attendant could no longer hide the uncertainty on her face. The confidence she had displayed only minutes earlier had completely disappeared. Emily Carter stood silently beside the supervisor, watching every reaction unfold. The chairman continued. Please allow us to correct this immediately. Your aircraft will remain at the gate. We will personally escort you back to your seat. Naomi looked through the terminal window toward the aircraft that still had not departed. This stopped being about my seat a long time ago, she answered. The issue is how easily your employees decided someone did not belong before verifying a single fact. A long pause followed on the line. I understand, the chairman admitted quietly. No, Naomi replied with steady conviction. Today you are beginning to understand. She ended the call respectfully and handed the phone back to the supervisor. Before anyone could speak, her own phone vibrated. Rachel Simmons appeared on the screen. Naomi answered immediately. Everything is ready, Rachel reported. The executive committee unanimously approved the recommendation. The $4 billion funding package has been placed on immediate indefinite suspension. Every participating financial institution has received formal notice. Horizon Airlines has also been informed that all negotiations are frozen pending executive review. Naomi simply nodded. Thank you, Rachel. She ended the call. The supervisor stared at her in stunned silence. The funding? He asked carefully. Naomi met his eyes. It has been suspended. The words spread through the gate faster than any announcement over the loudspeakers. The businessman who had mocked her earlier slowly sat down without saying a word. Several passengers exchanged astonished glances. One woman whispered, all of this happened because nobody bothered to verify a boarding pass. Emily quietly corrected her. No, It happened because people decided who she was before they checked the boarding pass. Those nearby nodded in agreement. Within moments, the supervisor's company tablet emitted a sharp notification. He looked down and his face immediately fell. Another notification appeared. Then another. Regional operations. Corporate compliance. Executive human resources. Emergency review initiated. Preserve all communication records. Submit incident reports immediately. The lead flight attendant's own device vibrated almost at the same time. She unlocked it with trembling hands. Her flight assignment had disappeared from the screen, replaced by a simple message directing her to contact corporate compliance before accepting any future schedule. One of the security officers checked his device as well. His next assignment had been removed pending administrative review. No accusations echoed through the terminal. No dramatic confrontation followed. The systems simply began doing what they had been designed to do once the truth reached the people responsible for protecting the organization's standards. Naomi watched quietly as every notification arrived. There was no satisfaction in her expression, only disappointment that events had reached this point at all. She looked toward Emily Carter and offered a grateful smile. "Thank you for speaking when it would have been easier to stay silent." Emily swallowed hard before answering. "I only told the truth." Naomi nodded gently. Organizations become stronger because of people willing to do exactly that. Around Gate B12, every passenger had witnessed something far more significant than a delayed departure. They had watched assumptions collapse under the weight of simple facts, and they had learned that the most expensive mistakes are often not financial at all, but the quiet decisions people make when they believe appearance is enough to judge someone's worth. Naomi Brooks looked once more through the terminal windows at the aircraft that had never left the gate. The boarding bridge remained connected. Ground crews moved carefully beneath the afternoon sun, while passengers quietly reflected on everything they had witnessed. The supervisor stepped forward with genuine humility. "Ms. Brooks, I cannot change what happened today, but I hope you will allow us the opportunity to earn back your trust." Naomi considered his words before answering. Trust is never restored by a single conversation. It is rebuilt by thousands of decisions made when no one is watching. The supervisor lowered his head in understanding. Nearby, the lead flight attendant remained silent. The certainty that had guided every decision she had made earlier had disappeared, replaced by the unmistakable realization that policies alone could never excuse failing to see the person standing in front of her. Emily Carter quietly gathered her tablet and prepared to return to her duties. Believing the moment had finally come to an end, Naomi stopped her with a warm smile. "Emily." She turned immediately. "Yes, ma'am." Naomi extended her hand. Never lose the courage to speak when something feels wrong. Skills can be taught. Integrity cannot. Emily accepted the handshake with grateful eyes. "I will remember that for the rest of my career." Naomi nodded. Then today was not wasted. The elderly gentleman who had defended fairness from the beginning slowly approached. "I have traveled for more than 40 years, he said, "and I have learned that character always reveals itself under pressure. Yours certainly did today." Naomi smiled appreciatively. "Thank you." The businessman who had laughed earlier finally stepped forward as well. His confidence had vanished, replaced by quiet regret. "Ms. Brooks," he said softly, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions without knowing anything about you." Naomi met his eyes without resentment. "Then let today become the last time you do that to anyone." He nodded slowly. "It will." Around them, several passengers quietly applauded, not because someone had won an argument, but because they had witnessed dignity remain unshaken from beginning to end. Naomi reached for her carry-on and began walking toward the terminal exit instead of back toward the aircraft. The supervisor looked surprised. "You are not taking the flight?" Naomi paused briefly. "No. Business can always be rescheduled. Principles should never be." She continued walking at the same calm pace with which she had first entered the aircraft earlier that afternoon. No security officers followed her. No one questioned where she belonged. Every person she passed stepped aside without being asked, not out of fear, but out of respect they had finally learned to give freely. As the automatic terminal doors opened, warm Georgia sunlight poured across the polished floor. Naomi walked into it without looking back. Behind her, Horizon Airlines faced difficult conversations, internal reviews, and an opportunity to become better than it had been that morning. Ahead of her waited another meeting, another city, another challenge. She welcomed all of them with the same quiet confidence that had carried her through every obstacle before. Some people believe power was measured by titles, wealth, or influence. Naomi Brooks knew something far more enduring. Real leadership begins long before anyone recognizes your name, and real dignity never depends on someone else's permission. She had never raised her voice that afternoon. She had simply refused to lower her standards, because the strongest statement a person can make is not proving they belong somewhere. It is building a world where no one has to prove it at all.